My name is Alex Razumov. I'm a training and visualization coordinator with WestGrid. And today we're going to talk about automating backups in Linux and macOS, so on Unix-like systems. So when it comes to backup, there are many possible strategies, and everything I'm going to show you today is based on my own workflow refined over the years. So the tools that I'm going to talk about today, DAR and borg, I used for many years, and actually DAR I've been using for close to 20 years, and it's a fantastic tool, so I highly recommend it, and I think it's good to share this knowledge in a webinar like this. The functions and the workflows I'm going to show you today, I really meant for backing up your own computer or perhaps your data in a server into which you can SSH or inside a cloud virtual machine. And not so much data on your Compute Canada, Canada directories on the clusters, simply because in Compute Canada, the home and project are already backed up, so you don't really need to back up this data. So if you by accident delete any files on a, let's say, Cedar cluster or Grain cluster in home or project, then you can simply send us an email to restore this data. But if you want just to, protect your data for double safekeeping, you can actually run these tools on Compute Canada systems as well. And everything I'm going to show you today is really meant as a template. So double check everything. So I'm going to share some functions with you, some bash functions. So double check everything, make sure that you understand what's going on. And the purpose of this webinar is just to walk you through the steps and to explain how I back up data and how I restore it. And the tools that I'm presenting, I tested them extensively on macOS and on Linux. And they will probably work in Bash shell on Windows, various Bash shell emulators. So Windows Subsystem for Linux, Cygwin, etc. And I saw reports online that people are using these tools in Bash emulators in Windows. So you can use them, but I have not tested it on Windows, so I don't know how well they work. And finally, when it comes to backup, everybody has their own preferences. Some people like doing cron backups, so have an automated backup that goes off every, let's say, 3 hours or every 24 hours. I personally don't do that, so I like to have an external hard drive or SSD that I connect to my system. I do the backup manually, and I monitor the backup as it goes. So I see the output to the number of files, some other stats, and this way I can actually monitor for any problems. And sometimes there are problems. Usually things run pretty smoothly, but I like live monitoring of backup scripts. And then once it takes a few minutes, backup is complete. I disconnect my drive and here you go. So if you spend any time online in the past few years, you must have heard about this 3-to-1 backup strategy mentioned on many different websites. And the idea is that you want to have at least 3 different data copies. One is the working copy, so your production copy on your computer, and perhaps 2 backups. And people mention using 2 different backup media. So I think this is probably not as important today. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people were backing up to optical media, to CDs, rewritable CDs and DVDs, and those usually have a lifespan of 5-10 years, so they degrade over time. So nowadays, if you back up to multiple drives, usually these drives are SSD or SSDs or hard drives. And if they are in a powered off mode, they usually last quite a while. So I changed this rule to, so I don't talk about 2 different backup media, but using 2 different backup tools. So today I'm going to show you DAR and borg. And the idea is that if you have an error in one of the backup setups, then hopefully the other setup preserves your data. So you have 2 different backup copies done with 2 different tools. And you probably want to have at least 1 offsite copy. So whether it's uploading to a remote SSH server, to some general commercial cloud, or rotating drives offsite. So I'm going to cover all these things. So sometimes computers come with their own backup tools. So for example, I use a MacBook, and on macOS, there's a built-in backup utility called Time Machine. And it's really good. It has a very nice GUI. It's super easy to use, super easy to restore. I don't personally use it for a number of reasons. So one of them is it is quite slow at times. So sometimes, you haven't done that many changes in your file system, and the backup should take, a maximum few minutes. And then you start Time Machine, and it just hangs there for hours. So you have a spinning wheel in the menu bar, and what it's doing is actually updating its index. And these things happen quite often, and there's nothing you can do about it. So essentially, you have to either pause it and then resume backup later on, or you just have to let it complete. So if you ever did a Time Machine backup on macOS and looked into the files that it stores as backup, you'll actually see that it stores millions of files, and it's very difficult to move them, to remove them, to move them to a different drive, et cetera, et cetera. So these millions of files are very difficult to manage, and they have really strange functions that are very difficult to manage manually. And this is one of the things that I don't like about Time Machine, is that it's really difficult to, let's say, take a Time Machine backup and move it to a different drive. And also the final reason is when you want to restore this backup, you have to use a Mac. And this is not good if, let's say, my next laptop, for example, is a Linux machine, and I want to restore my backup. Well, I won't be able to do this with Time Machine. There are multiple commercial online tools, things like Backblaze, et cetera, and they're good, but you usually have money. You usually have to pay money for these. They're not free. And then there are tons of, well, not tons, there are quite a few open source tools that are really good. So Rastic is one of them. But today I'm going to talk about DAR and borg. So just a quick table comparing the features of DAR and borg. DAR is not really a backup tool per se. It was actually created almost 20 years ago and still actively maintained as a modern replacement for tar. So tar is a classic Unix archiving utility, and has been around since 1979. But tar was designed for tape backup, and DAR stands for Disk Archiver. It was designed for disk backup, and it's much faster than tar. So it has a built-in index, supports differential backups, et cetera, et cetera. And it writes into flat backup files. So basically, when you do a backup with tar, you create a single file, and do another backup, it creates another file, and so on. So it's very easy to move these files, and there are no problems with moving your backup file, let's say, to a different drive. I covered DAR in a webinar almost 2 years ago in May 2019, and that webinar was not really concentrating on backup per se. It was managing many files with DAR, but I have some slides on backup there as well. So the second tool is borg, and borg, it was designed really as a backup tool. So it's a deduplicating backup utility. It has tons of features. So, all the nice things, encryption, compression, same things as DAR. It also supports remote backups in client server mode to an SSH, by SSH to a remote server. Unlike DAR that writes into flat files, borg writes into a repository, which has its pluses and minuses. And the way you restore things in DAR and borg are actually quite different. So I'm going to cover all this in more detail in the next hour. Last week, I gave a version of this talk for UBC. It actually took me 2 hours to go through all the slides and all the features in DAR and borg. So what I'm going to do today is I'll actually start with the second utility, with borg, because I think it's probably the best tool for most people. And it's really was designed as a backup tool. And then, depending on how much time we have left, I will go through some of the features in borg. So let me click on this slide. Oh, by the way, I have not mentioned the slides. Let me actually paste this into this link into the chat. So if you go to this website, this is our training materials web page. And at this website, there is a link. Let me actually open this page. There is a link to the slides and to a there is a link to the slides and to a bash script with all the functions I'm going to show you today. So PDF slides and the script, all of the things you can find at this link right here. Are there any questions at this point? So before I jump into borg. All right. So borg, as I mentioned, is a deduplicating backup program. It's open source, first released in 2013, really actively maintained. And deduplication means that each file is split into chunks, and only chunks that have never been seen before, either in the current backup or in previous backup, are added to the repository. So chunks are not large, they're probably of the order of a few kilobytes, but this simply means that when you are backing up data that has a lot of redundancy, a lot of repeating data, then you will have only one copy in the repository, and this is good. So Borg is fast, really fast. It's very efficient. It supports 256-bit encryption. It has various, you can choose between different compression algorithms. And as I said, it supports remote backup in client server mode to an SSH server.
Actually, Alex, I have a question.
Yes. Sure.
Thank you. So about the deduplication, what I understood about deduplication is that from one backup to the next, of course, data that hasn't changed isn't backed up again. But the way you present
that's not deduplication. That's just differential backup. So
right.
Differential incremental backup is you only backup stuff that has changed since the last backup. But
right, and so I thought that was deduplication, but deduplication
No.
seems to mean that if you have the actual same piece of data multiple times.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, okay. So I had never understood what deduplication actually was. Okay,
yes,
cool.
Exactly.
Thanks for
so
clarifying.
Let's say if you have a file and you copy this file 1,000 times and you have exactly the same copy of data in every file, it will copy or it will back up only one file. We'll see that all other chunks are exactly the same. And
cool. Even if of course the paths are different, it will still not. It will create some kind of link system or something to. Wow. Okay. Cool. Thank you. I had never understood that.
In that regard, yeah. So to install Borg, the best way to install Borg is via pip. So pip stands for, well, it's a Python package manager. And basically, if you have Python already installed, you probably already have pip installed. All you need to do is on any machine, whether it's your own computer or a remote server, just do pip install Borg backup, and that will install it into a location where pip usually installs packages. And usually it's a good idea to do this into a virtual environment, especially if you don't have super user privileges or root access on the system. So for example, you can easily install Borg backup, let's say on a compute kernel cluster. All you need to do is just create a virtual environment. We can call it Borg env. And then you source that environment. So inside this environment, you'll have Python and the pip package manager. And when you type pip install Borg backup, it will just install Borg into this binary directory, and then it will be once you source every time you source the environment, it will be available to you in your path. And sometimes when you install Borg, you might need to install some other dependencies. So if you want to use encryption and other things, you might want to install other libraries. So yesterday I was just playing with this on a blank Ubuntu virtual machine, and these are the packages I had to install before I was able to install Borg itself. So how do you set up the repository in Borg? Well, you need to issue the Borg init command. So let me just show you an example. So here, this is actually the first line. I'm going to copy and paste this into my terminal. So this line, what it does, it basically deletes the key and deletes all previous backups that I created. And I just want to start from scratch. So what I'm going to do is here I have 3 directories. So one is I'm going to be using it for storing data, one for backup. So currently these 2 directories are empty. So backups and restore are empty. And then I have the workspace directory that I'm going to be backing up. So of course, you can say why I'm backing up all to the same file system. This is just to show you how Borg works. So I mean, of course, in real life, you don't want to back up to the same file system. You want to back up to an external hard drive or external SSD or a remote server, right? But in this case, it's just a toy workflow where I have everything under the team directory. So what I'm going to do is I will initialize the repository, and I will say Borg init that -- encryption equal to key file. And so key file is just a keyword. It's not the name of the file. So this means that I'm going to be using a keyword file. And this is actually a default in Borg. So I'll explain in a second. And then what follows is the location of the backup repository. So my repository, Borg backup, will be sitting in TMP backups, which is currently empty. So I'm going to do that, and it will ask me to enter a passphrase, a password. I'm going to enter it twice, and then I don't want to display it. Okay, great. And now it says important. You will need both key and passphrase to access this repository. So that means that the password that I just typed, so I'll probably want to save it into a password manager so I remember it. And of course, I choose a secure password, so a fairly random password. And then the key is a file that is generated and it's stored on a system in a home directory .config borg keys directory. So it's just an ASCII file that has a key, but to both both to write into backup and to read the backup, and especially to restore, you will need both the key and the passphrase. So it's important not to lose one of them. So if you want to store your key in a safe place, what you can do is you can just take this file, or all the files in the keys directory, and copy them to another drive, store them in as text in your password manager, etc. So in borg, there's actually a command borg key export, and then the location of my repository, and then some safe location. So let's say in Dropbox or external drive where you want to put this key. And also you can export it. So this is a very cute utility. You can say borg key export -QR HTML. And what this will do, it will create an HTML file with an embedded QR code. So you actually don't have to write or copy that string of characters from a key. You can actually print it into a QR code, and then you can scan this QR code in the future. And this way you can restore your key quite easily. So to do manual backups, you will run the borg create command. So first of all, let me show you very quickly the data that I'm backing up. So here in the workspace directory, this is my work directory that I'll be backing up. I have 1,000 files. Actually, I can count the number of files. So you see it has 1,000, well, actually slightly more than 1,000 files. And the total size of this directory is 135 megabytes. So each file is a random file of from a few kilobytes to a few hundred, from few kilobytes to a few hundred kilobytes. And this is random data. So inside each file, I have binary random data, right? So this data actually doesn't compress very well, but that's good because borg will still be able to back it up. So to create a backup, what I do is I simply run this command. So I'm going to paste this command. I'm going to be creating the first backup. So I'm going to say borg create --stats means that it will also display some statistics of my backup. And then into this repository that I just initialized a few minutes ago, I'm going to be creating a backup called Monday. So Monday is my first backup. And into this backup, I'm basically writing everything from the TMP workspace directory. So it will ask me for a password. Every time you write to a borg repository, you will need to supply your password. And then it will take maybe 10 seconds, maybe 20 seconds. And here we go. So the deprecated size is the size of your backup. So all the data, roughly with some indices, that was written to the repository, right? So this is my initial backup called Monday. Now let's say I change something. Let's say I added a new file in the workspace directory. I'm going to call it I don't know, new, and just an empty file, right? So it's 0 bytes. And then let's say I want to do another backup. So now a borg, of course, will not create a full backup. It'll just create an incremental backup. It will only back up things that have changed since the last time. So I'm going to be creating a backup called Tuesday, and exactly the same command. The only thing that changed was the name of the backup. So I'm backing up the same directory into a backup called Tuesday in the same repository. And of course, it will ask for my password. So I type my password. And now you see the duplicated size. So now it's much smaller. So basically, it's the new file plus some metadata. So basically, it's 51 kilobytes, so much smaller size. And of course, I can continue going and creating new backups. So to list backups, so first of all, let's list all backups that are now present in our repository. You simply run the borg list command and then followed by the location of the repository. And every time it will ask for a password. And here you see that you have two backups. You have Monday and you have Tuesday. And these are the timestamps. So we can list very easily things inside each of these. Let's say inside of Monday, I want to list all the files. Well, I simply add column Monday, and then hit enter and type my password, and it will list all the files that I have in the first backup. So here we go. And I can do the same for the second backup. So notice that when I do this for Tuesday, so the second backup, which was much smaller, it was incremental with just a single file, it still lists all these files, right? It still lists all these files. They're still present in the second backup, and also lists the new file. Now, if you want to restore your data, you simply type borg extract followed by repository backup name. So Tuesday is my latest backup. And then optionally, you can supply the path to the file or directory that you want to restore. If you don't supply, then it will just backup. It will restore everything. Right. So let me just show an example. So I'm going to type borg extract. Oops, extract. And then Tuesday, and let's say I want to extract only a single file. Let's say this guy. And it's very important to supply the right path here. So this path is, you see, all this output from the previous list command, it gives you the path. Actually, let's do this file. So I just copy and paste this guy. So we're going to be restoring a single file. And actually, before I do that, I probably want to go into restore directory. So it's an empty directory currently. And then I'm going to restore a single file from the Tuesday backup. Type my password, and here's my file. And then my file is right here, right? So it says it's a binary file. So see it anyway? No. We can check on the size, and it's 76 kilobytes. So exactly what it was before backing up, right? So very easy to extract a single file, single directory, or everything. So when you extract everything, you just don't supply the last argument. Any questions so far? And in borg, unfortunately, wild masks do not seem to work. So you cannot do things like this, for example. So let's say I want to extract all files starting with test9. Unfortunately, this will not work in borg. It doesn't support wild masks. All right. So you can remove specific backups by using the delete command. So for example, we can say borg delete and then delete the Monday backup. So let's just do this. We'll delete the Monday backup. And done. So you did not complain, but actually deleted the Monday backup. And to check that, we can list the, run borg list. And you will see that it, in fact, deleted the Monday backup. So now we have only Tuesday. So all these files, test9 and 3 digits from Monday backup, they're still present in Tuesday backup. So what was deleted are the files, only the files from Monday backup that were not present in the Tuesday backup, right? So the index is cumulative in borg. That means that all files that were added to Monday, they're also inherited by the Tuesday backup, right? Which is great. In principle, if you don't want to use borg as a time machine to restore all the versions of your files, you can simply keep or you can only keep the last backup in your repository, and that will work great. You just won't have access to earlier versions of the file from previous archives. So in borg, there is a prune command that will delete all backups except the ones that you specify with a certain rule. So for example, if you do something like this, borg prune, and then keep last equal 1, this will delete all backups except for the very last backup, right? So you can also supply a more complex rule. For example, keep daily 7 will only keep the latest backup from each of the last 7 days. So let's say in the last 7 days, for example, you did 3 backups. So what this command will do, it will keep only those 3 backups, but not anything prior to the last, before the last 7 days, right? And you have to use Prune carefully because remember, it will delete all the versions of the files from the archive. So if you want to use borg as a time machine to restore all the versions, or similar to Git to restore all the versions of files, then probably you want to be very careful with using Prune. And if you have a lot of space on your destination, backup drive, then probably you don't really need to use Prune. The only reason why you want to use Prune is simply to reduce the size of your repository if you're running out of disk space. And a good practice is to use borg prune by specifying increasingly sparse intervals going into the past. For example, you want to keep all daily backups for the past week. You want to, for the past week, you want to keep all weekly backups for the past month, and you want to keep all monthly backups for the past 6 months, right? So this will keep fewer and fewer backups going into the past, and then nothing past 6 months. So all backups older than 6 months will be deleted. So are there any questions about Prune? Here I have a slide, a step-by-step look at Prune, but this is basically just to walk you through everything I just described. So if you are still not sure how Prune works, then I will, then you can take a look at this slide, and but I won't cover it here. So there's a question, how long will borg take to create a backup of the whole drive, say 1 terabyte of data? Not a very long time. So it will roughly, it depends primarily, it depends on the speed of your CPU and the speed connection to your drive, but essentially it's comparable to the time it will simply take you to copy 1 terabyte of data to your destination drive. So yeah, it depends on compression, but it's not, so compression is not a huge overhead in borg. So you can, the default compression is not very aggressive. So I would say it's comparable to the time it would take to copy 1 terabyte of data to your destination drive, plus maybe, I don't know, 30, 50% overhead, but it's not much longer. All right. So borg, as I mentioned before, it can also do remote backups, and it can do it in 2 different ways to an SSH server. So if you have access to a remote server, let's say, I don't know, a virtual machine somewhere in the cloud or your departmental SSH server, and you can log in to the system via SSH. So you can use borg in one of 2 ways. Either you can mount the remote file system via Fuse. So Fuse is a tool that lets you mount a remote directory, remote file system via SSH. And borg supports that. So Fuse is actually built into borg, so you don't have to do manual steps of mounting and unmounting the remote folder. But this will be slow, so I don't recommend this method. Much faster method is to use borg in a client server mode. So your local copy of borg on your computer is going to be a client, and then you'll need to install borg into a remote server, but it's super easy to do. So if you have Python, if you have virtual environment in your home folder, you can simply install borg into that virtual environment. You don't need root access on the remote server. And this way you can organize client-server communication that will be much faster than the first method. So how this works is very similar to the previous command. So in this example, I create a environment variable called destination. So it simply gives me the location of the remote folder to which I'm backing up. So you have SSH access as username, add some server, and then this is either an absolute path or path relative to your home folder. And then here's the location of the remote borg utility. So somewhere on the system you will have a bin/borg, and this is stored as a b remote variable. And then various flags, I'll just store them as a b flags variable. So I list the files that are being archived. I list some stats at the very end of the archival process. I filter the files, so I only include the files that were either added or modified, but optionally you can supply other filters as well. And then I use this compression LZ4. And then what I'm doing is the only difference from the previous command is instead of saying borg, borg command, borg init or borg create, etc., I say borg, and then I pass the remote path to the remote copy of borg, and then borg will actually work in client server mode. So it will use the remote copy of borg on the server to manage the files on the server, and then remote borg will talk to your local borg on your computer. And this works really, really well. So here I simply create a remote repository, and then here's one way to automate things is instead of supplying Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on as backup names, I simply use the current timestamp as the backup archive name. So this results in this format, so the year, month, date, hour, and minute, which I find works really great for backups. And then you create a backup, right? So you see borg, and then path to remote borg copy, create various flags, destination, the name of the archive, and then this is what you're backing up. So you're backing up the workspace directory, right? And the same for Prune. So you will use Prune in exactly the same fashion as before, except that before the word Prune, you add the remote path. All right.
Alex,
question? Yep.
There is a question in terms of speed between rsync and borg. So I mean, of course, rsync is not like a dedicated incremental backup system. It has but in terms of speed for simple deduplication,
They will be very similar. They will be very similar. So rsync and borg will give you very similar speeds. So the difference between rsync and borg is a proper backup tool. So borg will actually keep all the versions of files, and yeah, rsync is just for syncing directories. But in terms of speed, they will be very, very similar. Okay, so let's see what time I have. So it's 10:32. Let me now go to DAR.
Oh, sorry, there is another question about rclone.
Yes.
And I don't know if you want to answer that, Alex, or.
So rclone is the utility for accessing commercial cloud, right?
Right. Yeah, yes. Exactly. So they have totally different purposes. rclone is not in itself a backup system. It's a way to access remote drives.
Yes. So you can combine borg with rclone, and I'm going to show you an example towards the end of this presentation. So I have a script. I have a function that is stored in this file that I mentioned before. So if you go to this website, there's a link to the script with all the functions inside. But before I go there, before I show you the demo, I want to spend maybe 10, 12 minutes on DAR, and then we'll come back to this demo. So as I mentioned, DAR is a very different utility. So DAR is it's not a backup tool, it's a replacement for tar. So tar is the classic Unix archiving utility. It's been around for more than 40 years. And what tar does is it takes a lot of files and puts them into a single archive. And that archive is usually written to, well, historically they were written to tapes. The problem with tar is that it's very slow. So tar simply takes all these files and puts them, concatenates them together into a single file, but there is no global index in tar. So that means that if you want to list a file somewhere in the middle or extract a file somewhere in the middle of the tar archive or towards the end of the archive, you actually have to read the entire archive. So that means that listing files and extracting files in classic tar is very, very slow. So DAR was designed exactly to overcome this limitation. So it adds the indexing, and it adds a whole bunch of other things. So suppose full backups, incremental backups, differential backups. It has lots and lots of things. So suppose a compression, strong encryption, can split archives at 1 byte resolution. It supports all features of various fairly advanced file systems. For example, on a Mac, I often use sparse bundles or sparse files. And these are fully supported by DAR, so it works great on Mac and Linux.
Alex, sorry for interrupting you a little bit.
Sure.
Before you jump too far into DAR, there are still a couple of questions about borg. In particular, someone is a bit confused and wondering whether they need to first create archives before they can use borg. And no, you don't have to.
Well, you need to create a repository. When you use borg, the first step is to create a repository. You do it only once, right? And then, so borg init to create a repository, and then you use borg create to create a backup. So you cannot.
But you don't create an archive in the way you would with tar or something like that.
No. You just point borg to a file system, and it will back up that file system. So you can supply, in my demo later on, I show you examples of fairly complex paths. You can supply multiple directories, etc. To borg, and we'll just back up everything you throw at it.
Right. Yeah. No, thanks. Because there were some questions in the chat, and I wanted to clear that confusion. Sure. It's once you have your directory and you've initiated borg, you can just work on it, do your things, do regular backups. You don't have to archive anything. It's just a very simple, dynamic, convenient system. Thank you, Alex. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. So installing DAR is also fairly easy. So very often you can just, if you have root access to your computer, then you can just install it using Package Manager. And you can compile it from source. So compiling from source also very easy. So it depends on whether you want to enable compression or not. Sorry, encryption or not. So if you want to have encryption, then you probably want to install the encryption libraries first. So for example, on my Mac, I use brew to install gcrypt library, and then I compile DAR from source, enabling compression. And then you just run make install to install it. So we have DAR installed also in compute candidate systems. It's part of the standard environment, so both 2016 and 2020. So if you just type which DAR or simply DAR, it will show you the location. And in the webinar 2 years ago, May 2019, I actually showed some demos of speed comparison between tar and DAR, and you'll see that for a 10 gigabyte file, extracting things from the middle of the file on a disk is something like 50 times faster with dar than with tar, and it makes sense because it has the full index, so it doesn't need to read the entire file. So creating archives are fairly easy. So when you create archives with dar, it all writes into a single file, and the file typically will have a structure similar, well, the name similar to this one. So the base name is the name of your backup or your archive, then dot, and then the slice number. So I'll explain slices in a minute, and then .dar, right? So the extension. So to create an archive, let's say you wanna again compress everything inside TMP workspace. What you do is in dar, you don't need to set up a repository. There are no repositories. Everything is just stored in flat files. So what you say is dar minus w minus c all minus g workspace. What it will do is it will take everything from the workspace directory and put it into an archive, into backup. So the backup is all is the base name. So we'll create a file called all.1.dar. And this file, so actually let me run this right now. So I'm going to cd into TMP directory, and I'm going to be backing up everything inside the workspace directory. So I'm going to run this command. And again, it will take maybe 10, 20 seconds to run. Actually, no, it's much faster. So, and it created a file called all.1.dar, right? So this is my backup. Now, if I want to restore things, I just use this command to restore either a specific directory or a single file. And similar to borg, dar does not understand Unix wild masks. I don't know why, but you have to supply the full path of either a file or a directory that you're restoring. So let me give you an example. So here I'm going to go to restore, and I'm going to erase the previous, so starting from an empty restore directory. And then I'm going to say, let's say restore a single file. Actually, let's list everything inside the dar archive. So all is sitting, that file is sitting in the parent directory, parent to this one. So I can extract it using this notation. So not the file, so this won't work. You have to supply the path and the base name, but not the file name. So when you run this command, as you see, it will simply show me all the files that were added to the archive a minute ago, right? So let's restore. So to restore, let's say a given file, all I need to do is run a command similar to this one. And I'll need to supply the path to the base name like that. And this will restore a single file. So we, oops. Oh, yeah, it's restoring into the, because I already set it in the directory. So restore into the current directory. Here we go. And here it restored this file. So, oops, here's the file, which is 230 kilobytes, right? So now, let's say we already have a full backup called Monday. So let me erase, let me go one level up. Oops, let me go one level up, and then I'll remove all. Oops, sorry. I'll go one level up, I'll remove all. And then I will create a new archive that I'm going to call Monday. So it'll create a file called monday.1.dar. And into this archive, it put everything from the workspace directory. So I have 133 megabytes of files. And then let's just quickly make a couple of changes. So I'm going to add two files, let's say Tuesday 1 inside the workspace, and then also a new file called Tuesday 2 inside the workspace. And now I'm going to create a new archive. So I'm going to call this archive Tuesday, and Tuesday is going to be an incremental archive. So the way it works is I'm saying -a Monday. So this will use Monday as a reference. So Monday is the full archive, and a -c create. I'm creating Tuesday archive using Monday as a reference. So that means that it will only include the files that were changed or were new after Monday, right? So the new files or modified files. And again, I'm backing up everything from workspace. So let's do that. And you see that it says 3 inodes saved. So basically that means that it saved, instead of 1,000 files, close to 1,000 files originally, it saved the two files, Tuesday 1 and Tuesday 2 that I just added right here, Tuesday 1 and Tuesday 2, and also the workspace directory. So that's why it's 3. And now let's take a look at the size of this file. So you see that the first full backup is 133 megabytes. The second backup is 113 kilobytes, much smaller. So the second backup contains only the files that were added or changed since Monday, right? So that means that unlike in Borg, in DAR, if I remove the full backup, it will actually delete most of the files present in my archive, right? So this is very different from Borg. In Borg, the latest backup has the content of all your previously created files minus the ones that you remove somewhere in the middle. So in Borg. In DAR, the file content is separate, is sitting in all backup files, right? In all archives. So if you remove an earlier archive file, you remove earlier files as well. So be careful when you remove things. So another nice thing about DAR archives is that if I list the content of, let's say, the latest archive, it will actually have the full index of all previous backups, not the file content of the previous backups, but the index of the previous backups. So if I do this, dar -l list on the Tuesday latest backup, you'll actually list me all 1,000+ files that I have in Monday as well. And this is great because you can actually take this much smaller dar archive, a much smaller Tuesday.1.dar file and place it on an external drive, let's say a flash drive, and then you can use it as a reference for another archive, let's say called Wednesday. And that way you can actually back up a very large file system to a much smaller destination drive. And I use it all the time. So with DAR, I can use, let's say 32 gigabyte USB flash drive to fully back up my, well, by fully, I mean to do a complete backup, but it's only incremental backups of my 256 gigabyte SSD drive in this laptop. All right. So I'm going to skip a bunch of slides because I want to go to the demo.
Alex?
Are there any questions? Yep.
Yes, there are quite a few questions in the chat, and I've answered most of them, but I have a few uncertainties. So someone is wondering, if you use Borg, if you want to speed up your data transfer to some remote server, would you still speed things up if you first archived your files to decrease the number of files?
I don't think so. No, not really. No.
It's the amount of data that's being transferred that matters.
It's primarily the amount of data and the speed.
It's
of
not the number of
that is
individual files.
But no, Borg is quite efficient when it's, at least on, I don't know, on SSDs, it's quite efficient when it comes to, dealing with a lot of small files. So I don't think it will help you.
And then also there was a question, does Borg under the hood actually use SCP, or does it transfer file in a totally different manner to a remote server?
Yes, it uses SSH, so same mechanism as SCP, yes. So it uses secure shell connection.
But is it like actually SCP or some other tool of its own?
It runs over SSH, so I believe it's exactly the same mechanism as SCP.
Okay, yes. And then so when you use DAR and you have a whole folder with a bunch of subfolder structure, in the archive, are the paths of all the files kept in memory so that you can then recreate your whole structure of folder and subfolder and all that?
Sorry, yes, the archive contains the full directory structure. Yes, so if you list the index, so here we ran the command.
You have the full path, so you don't lose the structure. Yeah, okay, cool.
Yes, so but
I thought so, but
it has the full path relative to the base of your
backup,
of course, not the entire file system. So here it doesn't know that where my workspace is sitting, because I was just backing up workspace from I was in TMP, and from TMP I was backing up workspace. And what went into the path that went into the archive is the relative path of all files relative to the directory in which I ran the command, right?
But so even though it saves an archive, so totally flat file, you can recreate the whole depth
structure. Yes,
okay.
Yes, that's the whole point. Yes, that's the whole.
Thanks for clarifying everything. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So so if you want, you can limit the size of each slice. So for example, in this case, 10 megabytes. So let's say if we have 135 gigabytes of, 135 megabytes of data in workspace, and then we'll limit the size of each archive file to, let's say, 10 megabytes by passing this option. So this will result in 14 files, and the files will just be named all.1.dar, all.2.dar, and so on. So, and then try to store them, use exactly the same commands as before. All right. So now, what I'm going to do now is I'll go to the final script. I have actually a bunch of scripts in this. Let me open my, I'll drag my Emacs and I'll make it bigger. The font's bigger. So I have a bunch of functions in this script that you can download from the link that I mentioned before. And the first one is called pack, and this is just to demonstrate some ideas in how things are organized in the final script. So I'm going to skip this because I can explain it using the final script. So restore is a nice utility for restoring DAR backups. This is only for DAR, but you can see this. So it uses the DAR command, and I'm going to skip that as well. So count files, just to count the files in a directory that are passed to this function, and the main function is backup. So what I'm going to do is I will source the script that is sitting in my folder. Oops, functions. I'm going to source the script. So now I actually have a function that is called backup. That is exactly the same function that is defined in this script, right? So what this script does is let's just run it. Let's just run the function itself. So I'm going to say backup, and I will not supply any arguments to it. And it will tell me that there's a missing argument. And I like writing functions this way because I never remember what the flags are, and I simply don't supply a flag. And the way I structure these functions is it will tell you what you need to use. So it says there is a missing argument, it needs to be one of these. So basically, you can be doing a DAR backup, you can be doing a borg backup, you could be doing a borg backup to a remote server. You can upload your DAR backup with a clone to Amazon S3. You can list files in the Amazon S3 backup, and this is a special rule that I'll mention at the end. So let's just choose one of this option. And the first option I'm going to choose is DAR. Yeah.
Sorry, I have yet another question, and I apologize. Maybe you said that and I missed it. Does DAR do deduplication?
No, it does not.
Okay. Thank you.
Borg does it, DAR does not. But DAR does incremental backups and differential backups. So DAR, like Borg, will only backup data that changed since the previous backup, right? But it does not do deduplication, which is a different thing, right? So I'm going to choose the first option, DAR, and I'll just simply say backup DAR, and let's see what happens. Well, it says no backup disks found. And the reason for this is because DAR was set up in this script in such a way that the destination folder is right here. Is a choice of destination folder. So I have let's say this is an SSD drive, this is a smaller flash drive, and basically I need to connect this drive to my system. So here's the drive, an SSD drive. I'm just going to mount it to connect it to my laptop. So let me just wait a second. Yep, now it's online. So now I do backup DAR, and now the disk is found. So there's actually on my Macintosh, this file now, this directory is present, so volumes /G drive. And now it will say that there is a missing second argument, right? So I cannot just say backup DAR, I'll need to supply one of these guys. So what this will do is if I type backup DAR show, it will simply list all the archives, but I haven't created any archives yet. So I need to create the first backup. And the first backup in DAR in the script is called 0. So that's the top level, the full backup. And the way this works is, so if you look at the section under DAR, so it's all this code else if DAR, right? So all this code. So what it will do is here I'm simply backing up these directories. So instead of just the TMP workspace, I just show you an example of how you can add multiple directories to the source in DAR. Here I'm also backing up everything under document nodes, under documents projects, and under desktop. I'm going to be using these flags, so limit the size of each slice to 5 GB, use compression, is secure. I forgot it, but it's one of, you can look it up in the manual page for DAR. And then -X will ignore some patterns. So ignore all the files ending with the tilde. Those are the backup files from Emacs, and also ignore all the object files. You can also ignore directories if you want. And verbose messages means that basically some stuff will be printed as some stats will be printed as I do the backup. And then the flags is, here I'm excluding everything from these directories. I'm excluding an entire directory. So say in nodes, there is a Git repository, and I don't want to have the .git directory in my backup. So now I have my drive right here, and all I need to do is pass the 0 option, 0 flag, to create the full backup. So let me do this. And now it's doing so 135 megabytes inside workspace, and then also some files here, 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 and all of this goes into this flat archive. And by flat, I mean it's a single file, a single destination file, but the file will have the paths of all individual files. So you don't lose the directory structure when you restore things. And it'll take, I don't know, maybe half a minute, maybe longer. Let's just wait for it. Okay, done. So you see that it created a file 138 megabytes compressed. And now actually, if I run backup-show, it will simply show that file. So to do the first incremental backup, I'll do backup-1. So that will only include the files that were not that were modified since the previous backup. Of course, I didn't modify any files. I just did one backup after the other. And you can see that the size of the second backup is much smaller. So the first one was 138 megabytes, and the second one is 109 kilobytes. Well, you can ask why it's not 0, why it's 100 kilobytes? Well, the answer is because this file also contains the index of all previous backups. So this guy contains the list and the paths of all the files also included into this backup as well, into both backups, right? And that's why it's not 0, but it's 100 kilobytes. So in fact, you can use this guy, you can copy it to a flash drive and then use it as a reference backup to create a later backup. So let me add some things to, let's say, workspace directory. I'm going to add, I don't know, let's do 10 files. Let's say 1 to 10, right? So now inside the workspace, I have 10 files called A1 to A10, right? And then I'm going to do a new backup. So I created backup 0 and backup 1, and now let me create a backup 2. So this backup 2 will actually contain those 10 files that I just created. Here we go. And this guy actually contains the full index of all the files I've added to the archive so far, and also the contents of my 10 files that I just created a minute ago, right? And so on. So you can do backup.3, so the third archive, and so on. So now, if you want to prune your archive, if you're running out of disk space, what you can do is you can actually issue a command with a low number. So what if I run backup.1, what this will do, it will recreate this guy based on the latest version of the files in my source directories, and then it will delete these guys. So it will delete the later archives, right? So let me do this. And here we go. So I ran backup.1. Now, if I try to do something like this, for example, supply a high number, this will actually result in an error message. This won't work. And the reason for this is to do backup.10, you actually, in the script, you need to have archive number 9. So of course, to create archive number 9, you need archive number 8, and so on. But I think the idea is really very simple, and it works very well. And the beauty of DAR as opposed to borg is that it writes into these flat files that you can easily move around, scatter across different drives, et cetera, if you're running on low on disk on one of the destination drives. So any questions about this tool for writing DAR files using this function?
Alex, may I jump in and have a little comment? Because someone asked a question about backing up their entire C drive. And there's something that I'd like to say about that. If you want to back up your entire computer, there are lots of files to which you don't have all access to unless you have admin privilege or you use sudo on Linux. And so often I find that it's not a good idea to have absolutely your entire computer in a single backup, because then you need to use sudo or equivalently high privilege on Windows, etc., for all of your backup, and you want to avoid that when you can. So I think that it makes more sense to have a backup for your personal data, for instance, for which you don't have to escalate your privilege, and then have a separate backup for your system files for which you need to have a higher privilege for the backup. But combining them together, I think, doesn't make sense, because it forces you to escalate your privilege all the time for all of your backup, and it's less secure.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Mary. So the next thing I'm going to show you is taking your DAR backup and uploading to a remote to Amazon S3. So remember, one of the options is DAR upload, And what this will do when I run it, you can actually take a look at the function. So inside the function, let's just search for .upload. What this will do is simply copy all the things inside test001, so these two guys, and it will sync them using rclone to my bucket, private bucket on Amazon S3. So this is just the address of this bucket. Of course, you won't be able to write into it or to read from it because it's a private bucket. So I also have a private key. But how to do this, how to set up how to set this up, simply go to documentation for rclone. It's fairly easy. But basically what rclone will do is simply synchronize my destination folder with these two archives to Amazon S3. And all I need to do is just run this guy. And now it's uploading my 138 megabytes or so of data to Amazon S3, and that will probably take about 5 minutes. So because I don't have time, I won't do this. I'll just cancel it. But let me show you backup ls. We'll simply list the current files in my Amazon S3 bucket. And here are the files from previous backup demo, right? So the point here, it's really easy to combine DAR and rclone. But first with DAR, you do the local backup, and then you synchronize it to Amazon S3, for example, or another popular cloud destination. So now let's try to use borg with this utility. So backup, one of the options is borg, and let's take a look at this option. And this option is taking all the stuff in this file, so same source directories that I'm backing up, and then I'm putting them into a different destination folder. So this destination folder on the same SSD, currently it's empty. And before I do this backup, I actually need to initialize my repository, right? So what I need to do is type borg init, and then I'm actually bring up the slides because I don't remember the syntax. So -- encryption key file, and then these destinations. So I'm going to backing up to volumes G drive test 002, right? Okay, so it will ask me for a password, and then important, make sure that you keep both the password and the key, right? So now when I did this, it actually created some directory structure. So it created, when I initialized repository, it created the directory structure, basically an empty repository in this directory. And you should never change it manually, so because that will simply damage the repository. But you can interact with it using various borg commands. So what I'm going to do now is, I ran backup borg, and that will take all the files from the source directories and put them into this test 002 borg repository. Okay, so let me do this. Oops. Yeah, I need to do, forgot. I need to do. So do will actually do the backup. So show prune will do, show will list the backups, and prune will prune the backups according to some rule. So I'm going to do this. It will ask for a password, and then it's adding all these files from workspace and some other files. So it should take under a minute, writing this to the repository on my SSD. So one of the other options, last option I'm going to show you is borg remote. So I set up a, let me go to my Emacs file, just the very last demo, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Let me search for borg remote. So I set up on a virtual machine just for demo purposes, on a virtual machine on Abuter's cloud. I set up a, so it's a virtual machine with a copy of borg installed into, borg environment bin directory in my home folder. And all I need to back it up is basically provide these flags. They're already in the script. And all I do is just do borg remote. And this will back up a couple of folders, so notes folder and desktop folder, and then just show you how to do exclusions. It will exclude these two folders. So let me do this. I'm doing this, and it says backing up these folders and then excluding these folders. And then I need a passphrase for my backup. So let me enter it. And here we go. So now it added, I did a full backup yesterday, and now it's only adding the files that changed since yesterday. And as you can see, the total size of my differential backup, only the changes is 120 kilobytes, and then it was added to a remote machine via SSH. All right, so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to show you the last slide and open the floor for questions. I showed you many tools, and you really don't have to use both DAR and backup. DAR and borg. Just use the tool that you think is better for you. So, in my opinion, for most users, borg is a better tool because it provides rich functionality and it has these nice repositories. DAR really works well when you want to back up to flat files. So by flat, I mean a single file. So if you want to back up to a small number of files, not to deal with a complex repository, and then you want to move these files very easily around to different drives, then DAR is better than borg. You can combine multiple methods into a single workflow. Just don't go crazy. What I mean by this is do, let's say, weekly or monthly rotation where, for a week, you only back up using borg to this drive, and the next week you back up using borg to a different drive, and then one of the drives could be in your office, one of the drives could be at home, or you just do a weekly or monthly rotation, and don't combine too many backups into a small time frame. And that's all. So that's all I wanted to say. If you have questions, I'm happy to stick around.